Hi everybody, it's November 25th, 2018, and I'm Tom Coyle from Adventures in Leadership. Thanksgiving was only a few days ago, and I happened across a controversy that I didn't anticipate. And there's several articles talking about A Charlie Brown Thanksgiving and how the episode perhaps didn't age well at best and at worst was racist in terms of how Franklin, the African-American character, is portrayed seated at the table. Now, if you look at the picture here, this is what everyone's talking about. As you can see, Franklin is seated by himself. And I can see why people might be like, oh gosh, what's going on here? I'm uncomfortable with that. So let's talk about it. And as we talk about it, let's look at a few different angles. Now, I might see why looking at this might get people concerned. Oh my God, he's by himself. This is valid. Yeah, I'm not sure I like this. Valid concern. So let's take a look at who Charles Schulz was. Again, a man who felt he had to do more to spread a message of integration. In the wake of Martin Luther King's assassination in 1968, he created the Franklin character because he felt he wanted to do more to spread messages of integration between black and white communities. In fact, several newspaper syndicates were uncomfortable with this idea and were against the idea altogether, but Schulz said if they did not run the comics, he'd stop writing them. So they gave in. So now let's look at it in that context. And unfortunately, Mr. Schulz is dead, so we can't ask him what he meant or why it was arranged the way it was. Now, if you watch Charlie Brown Thanksgiving, as the feast went on there, Linus, as he often does in many of the episodes, becomes kind of the leader of the group. You look at these holiday messages, whether it's the Charlie Brown Thanksgiving or Charlie Brown Christmas, Linus ends up taking the leadership role and brings the gang together. And so there's Linus seated at the head of the table as the host, the de facto host, if you will. To his immediate right is Franklin. Now, this is interesting because if you know anything about table etiquette, the host sits at the head of the table and the guest of honor sits to the immediate right. So that means Franklin is set in the guest of honor spot. Hey, buddy. My son's here in the background. So anyway, now take that context and think, that's a tripod. So now what we're looking at is why was he by himself? Why was he by himself? Well, I think, because again, the cartoon comes out in 1973, I think the reason Franklin is seated by himself is Schulz wanted the white audience to see, without any mistake, without missing it, an African-American kid having a Thanksgiving meal with his friends. If you had other people on the same side of the table as Franklin, perhaps that message is not as obvious, or at least not as obvious as he wanted the message to be in 1973. So he wanted Franklin on his own side, occupying his own space, so that the white audience could see, look, here's a black kid. He's sharing a meal at the same table with his white friends. And this was a relatively new idea. This was just starting to get into our consciousness in that time. So while I appreciate the concerns and someone saying, hey, what's going on here? Yes, we should talk about it. And let's talk about it. Let's use this as a teaching point. If my kids were to ask me, Daddy, why is Franklin seated by himself? Great teaching point. I would explain to him what I'm explaining here. But I also would say, hey, what would you do if you saw somebody like Franklin seated by himself? And my kids would say, well, I would sit down next to him. So we can use this as a teaching point. So instead of just never watching it again, consider enjoying the episode. And when we look at a lot of TV shows and movies, perhaps they have not aged as well. We can use teaching points to A, address modern concerns people may have, and then having a discussion and learning from it. The other thing I want to do in discussing these old shows, again, take an example of Charlie Brown Thanksgiving, let's revisit who Charles Schulz was and understand he was a man who valued integration. And so in that context, it's very important. And even if it hasn't aged as well as you would have liked it to have aged, many of us would rather say, gosh, even my wife and I were discussing this, and she was like, yeah, he should have had some other characters on the same side of the table with him. Yeah, probably should have. I mean, in the modern context, but I can see perhaps there was a reason he wanted to do that. Now, leave you on a more happier note, here is another picture. This is one my wife has been sending around, where it does show Franklin seated at the table around with everybody else and being more included. So anyway, a lot of information here, but let's acknowledge the point, but maybe take a step back and not overreact. Maybe it was not a deliberate racist thing, and maybe there's reasons for it as I outlined here. Unfortunately, we'll never know. Anyway, I hope you found this video useful. Please share it. Welcome your comments, because these are things we should be talking about. When people have certain views, when people have concerns, we should address these concerns and hear different perspectives and arrive at a solution. Thanks for watching.